Okay, YouTube. So, these types of videos I have been interested in the past few days, but I was really interested in this one because this one was a video that, despite my love for anime, despite my love for overall just everything Death Note, I never expected. I'm gonna be honest, I already watched the Epstein one, and it was a fucking banger. Shout out to that guy. Um, but it now became a trend, right? Where everybody's just saying like, could L catch the Zodiac Killer? Could L catch Epstein? Could L catch fucking Walter White? Like, it's a whole trend. So we're gonna snap into this one. We're gonna get into this one, and we're gonna see how good it is. Let's go.
It would take L less than a week to identify the Zodiac Killer. Not arrest him, that window closed decades ago, but identify him with zero reasonable doubt left standing. Let me break down exactly why, and more importantly, exactly how. This one's gonna take a while, because unlike a lot of cases we cover, the real Zodiac file is enormous. And if we're doing this properly, we need to go through basically all of it. So settle in. For anyone new here, in the world of Death Note, the three greatest detectives alive, L, Araldo Coyle, and Denuve, are the same person operating three separate identities so that no single failure or assassination can end him. This isn't a guy who occasionally gets lucky. His successors.
I personally thought that Epstein would have probably wanted him killed, right? Because the point that the guy made in the video about Epstein was that Epstein would have tried to invite L to his house, right? But L is smart enough to understand that it's not that simple for him to just reveal that identity unless you are a prolific serial killer. Like, Epstein was just a sex trafficker. Not that that isn't serious. I'm not trying to mitigate it in any way. But L, he wouldn't have took Epstein serious at all. At all. And he would have solved that case in about 10 minutes. And that's just me being generous.
Here and Mello were raised specifically to approximate a fraction of his thinking, and even they're treated as generational talents in their own right. L himself has spent his entire adult life inside investigations. Most task forces would need 100 people and 6 months to properly map out, and he does it while eating cake and sitting like a gremlin. The specific skill that matters today isn't the crossword puzzle stuff or the memorization stunts. It's his.
And the funny thing is, like, L is a multi-billionaire, and all he wears is that shit. I mean, I'm not the type of nigga to judge a book by its cover, but my God, like, you couldn't at least put a good little suit on with some shorts and shit like that. Like, you couldn't have did that, and not to mention he only lives in that one hotel. I think that's what it was.
Approach to what I'd call cold, decentralized cases. Ones where the evidence isn't hidden, it's just scattered across too many people, too many jurisdictions, and too much time for any one investigator to hold the whole shape of it in their head at once. That is, structurally, exactly what the Zodiac case is. So let's actually build the real case file first, because you need to understand how much information was on the table before you can appreciate what it means that nobody put it together. The real case, from the beginning. Some researchers push the origin back to October 30th, 1966. In River.
Now, about the Zodiac Killer, I know it was unsolved. I believe so. But I don't know much about the case. Like, I've heard about it as much. I heard that he's one of the most prolific serial killers to ever live. But I don't know much about this case. And so if I'm just like kind of out of the loop with everything and I'm just not speaking as much, that's why. Because I don't know that much about that case.
Riverside, California, when a college student named Sherry Jo Bates was stabbed to death near her campus library. A poem discovered carved into a desk in that same library months later had handwriting and phrasing that California's top question documents examiner at the time believed matched the Zodiac's later letters. The Zodiac himself even referenced Riverside activity in a 1971 letter. But to be precise, this connection has never been confirmed, so we're setting it aside as background noise rather than a confirmed data point. The confirmed timeline starts on December 20th, 1968. 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen are found shot to death on Lake Herman Road, a rural stretch outside Vallejo. No physical description of a suspect, no known motive, nothing. It reads like a dead end. Then, in the early hours of July 5th, 1969, 22-year-old Darlene Farron and 19-year-old Mike Mageau are attacked in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park, also near Vallejo. Farron is killed. Mageau survives and is able to give police a partial description. description. And here's the detail that changes everything. Shortly after the attack, someone calls the Vallejo Police Department and calmly reports both the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the earlier Lake Herman Road murders, in a way that makes clear he's the one who did both. 3 weeks later, on July 31st, 1969, 3 separate Bay Area newspapers, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle, each receive a letter. Every letter includes 1/3 of a 408 symbol cipher, and every letter opens the same way.
I swear I hated those motherfuckers. Like, those little, like, cipher things that you had to, like, so I hated those things. I hated having to look at them because they were so confusing and just unimportant. Like, I don't know why we had to do that shit in class one time. It was just so annoying.
I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas. He includes case details only the killer or police would know, and he threatens to cruise around all weekend killing lone people if the papers don't run the cipher on the front page.
For all my lawyers who's gonna be watching this, like, do y'all in college or whatever, do you guys have to figure out, like, what the ciphers are of certain killers? Just as, like, some type of, like, assignment for class? Like, if you're in criminal justice or you're, like, trying to be a lawyer or a police officer or anything, do y'all have to, like, figure out ciphers and shit? Because, like, that's what a lot of killers use to, like, plant hits and shit like that. Just a question, though.
He tells them that solving it will reveal his identity. On August 4th, a follow-up letter to the Examiner opens with, "This is the Zodiac speaking," the first time he uses the name that sticks for the rest of history. The very next day, August 5th, 1969...
Let me read this. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I have had in Vallejo, I shall be very happy to supply even more material. By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me. On the 4th of July, I did not open the car door. The window was rolled down all the way down. I'm not gonna read all this shit. He essentially just, throwing some shade at the police and shit like that. Kind of like what almost every single twisted fucking serial killer does.
Cipher is cracked, not by the FBI, not by the CIA, both of whom had also been trying, but by Donald and Betty Hardin, a school teacher and his wife in Salinas working it out by hand at their kitchen table. Betty had guessed that the word kill would show up doubled somewhere in the text, used that as her way in, and from there, the whole substitution cipher unraveled. The decoded message doesn't name him, just says, in his own garbled spelling, that killing is more thrilling than hunting game, that he expects to be reborn in paradise, and that his victims will become his slaves in the afterlife. He explicitly refuses to give his name, saying it would let police slow down his collection of slaves. Then, on September 27th, 1969, the attacks changed shape entirely. At Lake Berryessa in Napa County, a man in a black executioner's hood with the Zodiac circle and cross symbol stitched onto his chest approaches college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at a picnic spot, claims to be an escaped convict who needs their car and money, then ties them both up and stabs them repeatedly. Shepard dies of her injuries.
Damn.
Hartnell survives and is the one who gives police the detailed description of the costume. On October 11th, 1969, he changes method again. 29-year-old cab driver Paul Stein is shot in the head in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. This time there are witnesses nearby.
This nigga was catching bodies like Agent 47. God damn. Like, nobody told me, like, the Zodiac Killer was that lethal. Like, he might have been moving like... Who was a good video game character? That nigga was moving like a real life Yagami. I'm fucking twisting my words. But yeah.
Teenagers who see a man leaving the cab, and a partial fingerprint is lifted from the vehicle. 2 days later, the Chronicle receives a letter containing a swatch of Stein's blood-soaked shirt as proof, along with a threat to shoot children on a school bus. That threatened attack never happens, but it's specific enough that it gets referenced for decades afterward, including inspiring a scene in the 1971 film Dirty Harry. On November 8th and 9, 1969, he mails the Chronicle a 340-character cipher, along with a claim of having killed 7 people and a crude bomb diagram. This cipher, Z34...
Oh, that nigga must want to smoke. That nigga must want to smoke.
Does not get solved for another 51 years. In December 1969, he sends a card to attorney Melvin Belli, who had publicly offered to help him, again enclosing a scrap of Stein's shirt. Through 1970, he keeps writing an April letter with a 13-character cipher opening with "My name is" that trails into nothing, a June letter with a 32-character cipher that appears to reference the unsolved shooting of an SFPD officer, and an October postcard to Chronicle reporter Paul Avery that misspells his name as Averly and is later interpreted by some researchers as referencing an additional, unnamed victim. In March 1971, a postcard sent to Avery includes the phrase "Sought Victim 12," which some connected to the unexplained disappearance of Donna Lass near Lake Tahoe the previous September, though that link, like the Riverside one, has never been confirmed. His final confirmed letter arrives in 1974, in which he claims a total of 37 victims. Then, after roughly 2 decades of correspondence, murders, and taunts, he simply stops. Forever. Here's the tally of what's actually confirmed. No more, no less. 5 known dead, 2 survivors, 4 ciphers, of which only 2 have ever been solved. One within days in 1969, and the other in December 2020, by a team of independent codebreakers, David Orenchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck, using custom software and roughly 650,000 attempted keys. Another solved cipher reveals a name. Over 2,500 suspects have been formally investigated by police over the decades. The name most associated with the case, the one police themselves treated as their strongest lead, is Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted child molester who died in 1992. He was never charged, and DNA testing on some of the physical evidence has never conclusively matched him or anyone else. As recently as 2021, an amateur group called the Case Breakers publicly named a different deceased individual, Gary Francis Post, as their suspect. Law enforcement did not accept the claim, and the case remains officially open today, arguably the most famous unsolved serial murder case in American history. That is,
I'm definitely gonna look more into that. I'm probably gonna talk about it on the podcast because, like I said, it is gonna be, an official crime podcast going forward. But we gonna try to dive deep into that case. And this video was very helpful. Shout out to the dude who made it. Let me drop a like for him real quick.
An enormous amount of confirmed, cross-referenced, publicly available information, which is exactly why L wouldn't need new evidence to do what 50+ years of task forces couldn't. He'd just need to process what's already sitting there all at once without any of the jurisdictional walls that fractured it the first time. The human problem.
Funny thing is, we don't got nobody like L in real life. Now, obviously, ain't no nigga who's a multi-billionaire, a top detective, gonna wear the shit that he wearing, but I feel like people like that need to be taken more serious. People who are actual detectives, because if we're being honest, the internet sometimes can be better detectives than actual detectives. And they don't really do it. That's the reason, what are they called? Vigilantes exist. People who hack other people, who do bad shit, people who essentially kill other bad people, because the police don't know how to fucking do their job. And too many people with power have too many connections with other people with power, so they avoid consequence. So I understand why vigilantes are a thing, but we do need more people like L, because too many people get away with too much shit.
Not the evidence problem. Before we get to L, you need to understand exactly how this case actually fell apart on a procedural level, because this is the part that turns an unsolved mystery into a genuinely infuriating one. The killer picked his targets across 4 different jurisdictions on purpose. Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs fell under Vallejo PD. Lake Berryessa was Napa County Sheriff's territory. The Stein murder was San Francisco's. 3 separate police forces, 3 separate paper trails, 3 separate chains of command. None of them originally built to share a single active homicide file in real time. That fragmentation is exactly the kind of structural weakness L specializes in exploiting when he's on the right side of a case, and exactly the kind of weakness that let a killer operate for years when nobody exploited it against him. San Francisco's lead investigator was Inspector Dave Toschi, alongside his partner Bill Armstrong, and by every account, Toschi worked the case relentlessly for nearly a decade, visiting the Stein crime scene on the anniversary of the murder year after year just to see if he'd missed anything. But in 1978, it came out that Toshki had been anonymously mailing fan letters praising his own detective work to Chronicle writer Armistead Maupin.
What the
SFPD's
fuck?
internal review confirmed he wrote them. He was pulled off the Zodiac case entirely and reassigned to the pawnshop detail, and the scandal was serious enough that questions even circulated about whether he'd forged one of the actual Zodiac letters himself, something he denied until his death in 2018 and which was never conclusively proven either way. Whatever you think of Toshki personally, the practical result was that the single most experienced investigator on the case, the man who'd built 9 years of institutional memory around it, got removed at the exact moment continuity mattered most. This is the kind of failure point L is built to route around. Not because he's incorruptible in some cartoonish sense, but because his entire operating model assumes that any single human node in an investigation, however competent, is a liability the moment the case depends on that one person's continued presence, reputation, or authority. He doesn't build a case around one detective's decade of accumulated instinct. He builds it as a standing structure that survives any individual being compromised, reassigned, or discredited, which is precisely the failure mode that took the real case's most knowledgeable investigator out of the room at the worst possible moment. Why the cipher was never the actual puzzle. The instinct everyone has with this case is to treat the ciphers as the lock and assume the killer's name is the key sitting inside it, waiting. Zodiac himself encouraged that framing directly, telling police in his own letters that cracking his codes would reveal who he is. L reads that claim and discards it almost instantly because it doesn't hold up against the killer's actual behavior. A man disciplined enough to vary his weapon, his method, and his location across 5 separate attacks, specifically so investigators in different counties wouldn't immediately realize they were dealing with one person, is not the same man who's going to embed a confession in a puzzle for fun. The cipher was never a confession. It was a...
Like, the cipher, ain't no real killer finna sit there and, hint at who they really are in no cipher. So I feel like anybody would be smart enough to know that, right? Because, like, if you a nigga who's, like, very meticulous in the way that you kill somebody, in the way that you structure your whole... the way that you structure all your killings and, where you put the bodies at and the locations where you kill somebody, you not gonna sit there and, try to play with your identity to the police. Like, that shit just not going to nobody.
leash.
Especially today.
Kept 3 newspapers publishing his letters on demand for years, which was the actual goal the entire time, an audience, not closure. So while decades of cryptographers, amateur and professional, poured their effort into symbol frequency tables, L would skip past the code almost entirely and go to where he always starts. The behavior underneath the performance. How L actually builds the file? He starts with the letters themselves, not for what they say, but for what the writer reveals about himself without meaning to. The specific, repeated misspellings, the exact cadence of the taunting, the way he addresses journalists directly and consistently gets their names slightly wrong in the same pattern every time. Every letter becomes a linguistic fingerprint, cross-referenced against handwriting exemplars and behavioral testimony already sitting in police files from named persons of interest. Then he maps the geography properly. Every attack, Vallejo, Benicia, Napa County, San Francisco, sits inside a tight regional radius. That's not a drifter's pattern. That's someone operating entirely inside terrain he already knows, roads he's driven, back routes he trusts in the dark. L treats it the way he'd treat any closed system, who had a documented reason to move freely and repeatedly through all 4 locations without drawing attention. From there, he does the thing the actual 1969 investigation structurally couldn't. He cross-references every flag name simultaneously against 3 independent categories at once: handwriting analysis, verified access to all the crime scene locations, and personal testimony from people who knew them. Individually, none of that proves anything, which is exactly why the real case stalled for over 50 years. Every single lead accumulated just enough reasonable doubt to never clear the bar for an arrest on its own, but L was never trying to find one overwhelming piece of evidence. He was building a probability model out of dozens of small, independently unremarkable details, until exactly one name survived every filter without a single contradiction left standing against it. Setting the scene, L actually working the file, picture it properly. It's some point after the Stein murder, once all 3 jurisdictions have a body count and a matching symbol scrawled across their letters. Watari sets up a secure line between the 3 departments, something none of them had the authority or the political will to arrange for each other in 1969, and L starts pulling the complete file into one workspace for the first time in the case's history. He doesn't start with the ciphers. He starts by laying every letter chronologically against every attack, timestamp against timestamp, and immediately flags the thing almost nobody weighted heavily enough at the time: the phone call.
Sometimes when I'm reading cases, I often try to visualize, just based off the evidence, based off the testimonies, based off the defense in the contrary to the prosecution's evidence. I try to base what I think happened and visualize in my head the night that it happened the best way I can. Because that's what I do. Like, I don't like to watch full-on 4-hour trials because God knows how excruciating that is, especially being me with ADHD. But it sometimes can be fun. Now, granted, is it fun? No, because these are real people's lives, and somebody being murdered shouldn't be like some fun Scooby-Doo solve the mystery type shit. It should be treated like a thorough investigation, and bringing justice for the family and bringing closure to the family, right? And I feel like people should respect that instead of just playing Scooby-Doo detective and shit like that. So that's just something I like to do, like, because I just can't help it sometimes.
Right after Blue Rock Springs, the killer calmly phones it in himself, unprompted, before any letter campaign exists. That's not a man building toward a media strategy. That's a man who already understands, before he's ever written a single word to a newspaper, that attention is the entire point. Everything that follows, the ciphers, the costume, the taunts aimed at named reporters, is an escalation of that same instinct, not a series of disconnect.
Yeah, this guy must have not gotten enough attention when he was a kid. Like, he had to not had that much attention. Society must have been fucked up to him, and he got bullied in school. His parents were just like fucked up individuals, terrible human beings. Like, that's probably the case. That's the case with most serial killers.
Behaviors. L treats that phone call as the actual origin point of the profile, months before the letters even begin. Next, he lays the geography over a physical map the way you'd lay tracing paper over an X-ray. Vallejo, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, Presidio Heights. 4 points that, on their own, span multiple counties and look scattered. Overlaid together, they describe a fairly tight home range for someone who knows the back roads well enough to approach and leave each site without being seen arriving. Cross-references that shape against the employment and residency records already sitting in Vallejo PD's own files, the same files Toschi and Armstrong had partial access to on the SFPD side, but no standing authority to fully merge with Napa County's or Vallejo's parallel paperwork. Then comes the part that actually mattered more than any cipher: the handwriting and behavioral file, held up against the reporters. The killer names Paul Avery directly in multiple letters, misspells his name the same specific way every time, and later references Toschi by name in a letter after his role became public. L reads that pattern as a killer whose sense of control depends on the investigation knowing that he's still watching it, not just committing crimes and vanishing. That's psychologically incompatible with someone drifting anonymously through the Bay Area. It's someone embedded closely enough to the story's coverage to track who's covering it and how. That single behavioral thread, run against the property, employment, and personal testimony, records already flagged by 1969's own detectives, is what finally makes the probability model converge, not a fifth cipher nobody's ever found. Where L actually lands. Working through the complete file laid out this way, L converges on the same handful of names that still dominate the conversation today, and the profile that survives every filter overlaps heavily with the man police themselves treated as their primary suspect for most of the investigation's life. What L would not do, and what I'm not going to do either, is declare a dead private citizen guilty beyond any doubt on a YouTube video when the actual DNA evidence has never conclusively closed that door either way. That's not how L operates, and it's not how this video is going to operate. What L would get, though, is something more useful than a headline name. He'd get certainty about the shape of the failure. This case was never actually a mystery of missing information. It was a mystery of nobody having the authority, the time, or the cross-jurisdictional reach to connect what was already sitting in separate evidence lockers in 3 different counties further weakened the moment the one detective who'd spent 9 years building institutional memory around it got pulled off the case entirely. Vallejo PD had pieces. Napa had pieces. San Francisco had pieces. The Hardens cracked a cipher from their kitchen table with no law enforcement backing at all. Every piece of this case existed. It just never existed in one head, held all at once, without a career or a reputation riding on which piece got followed first. That's the actual answer to the title of this video. Could Elle catch the Zodiac Killer? Not with a genius nobody else had access to, with patience and cross-referencing power nobody else had the time, authority, or institutional stability to apply, back when it would have actually mattered. Closing the file. There's a reason this case sits differently than the others we've covered on this channel. Most cases we run through Elle's head end with a name, a conviction, a clean resolution. This one doesn't get that. Not because Elle fails, but because the real world simply ran out the clock decades before anyone with Elle's actual capabilities was ever going to be handed the file. That's the genuinely unsettling takeaway here. It's not that the Zodiac was some unbeatable criminal mastermind. It's that beating him was never actually about genius. It was about whether the system investigating him could out-coordinate its own bureaucracy faster than he could keep exploiting the gaps between 3 different police departments. It couldn't, and once the letters stopped in 1974, the clock ran out for good. So the next time somebody tells you the Zodiac Killer pulled off the perfect crime, remember, it wasn't a perfect crime. It was a case that never had one person looking at all of it all at once before it went cold. And if you want to see what happens when that kind of case finally does land in front of someone who refuses to let it go, you already know exactly who to bring in next.
Wow. Just wow. Like, now that was a very interesting video. I didn't realize I was recording for that long, but that was a very interesting video. But I definitely feel like he made the point, like, a lot of people are not going to have the patience to deal with a lot of that cipher shit. But I do feel like Ale just, he wouldn't have let it go cold. Like he wouldn't have let that case go cold. Especially being that, a lot of the cases he got called on to solve the most difficult cases the FBI in America, Japan, and different countries couldn't even solve. So I definitely wouldn't argue that he didn't have the patience to solve them. But yeah, I do feel like Ale could have caught the Zodiac Killer if the time. It's just all about timing and patience, like he said. And if Ale got help, he would have solved it a lot quicker. But if he wasn't on a time frame, then he would have solved it. I don't think he would have solved it in time. But if he would have had a team around him, I definitely think he would. But yeah, that's all I really got to say about it.